Teodora Vance never expected the worst night of her life to end with the most dangerous man in New Orleans kneeling on the floor of her hotel suite, pressing a monogrammed handkerchief against the cut on her palm like it was the only thing in the world that mattered to him. But that's the thing about nights that start with a loaded gun and a man who calls you the Fat Maid. They tend to end somewhere you never saw coming. She had been working the graveyard shift at the Aldermore Grand for 11 months. Not the lobby, not the front desk, not anywhere the guests could see her clearly under the chandelier light. Teodora worked housekeeping, the invisible infrastructure of a 5-star hotel. The woman who made sure the Egyptian cotton was turned down at precisely the right angle, that the minibar was restocked, that the smell of someone else's bad evening was gone before the next guest arrived. She was 26 years old, 5'4", and weighed somewhere in the neighborhood of 270 pounds. A fact she had stopped apologizing for some time around her 23rd birthday when she realized that apologizing for it had never once made her life easier. She was good at her job, methodical, quiet. She knew which suites had guests who tipped and which ones had guests who left the room looking like a crime scene. She knew the building's rhythms the way a sailor knows the ocean, which elevators ran slow, which linen closets had the best lighting, which floors smelled like old cigarette smoke no matter how many times the carpets were cleaned. She did not know until the night of October 14th that the Aldermore Grand was also the preferred meeting place of Bastian Voss. If you were not from New Orleans, the name meant nothing. If you were from New Orleans and you moved in the right circles, or the wrong ones, depending on your perspective, the name meant everything. Bastian Voss was 41 years old, German-American by blood, Southern by chosen territory, and the operating head of the Voss Syndicate, which controlled the flow of money, goods, and favors through the port of New Orleans with the kind of quiet, total authority that never made the news because the people who might report on it had, over the years, found better use of their time. He was not loud about what he was. That was the thing people didn't understand about men like Bastian Voss. The movies had trained everyone to expect the slicked-back hair and the shouting and the dramatic speeches over dinner tables. Bastian Voss wore unremarkable dark suits and had the kind of face that was handsome in a way you noticed slowly, the jaw, the gray at his temples, the pale green eyes that tracked everything in a room like a man doing a continuous inventory. He spoke quietly. He rarely repeated himself. The people who worked for him had learned that silence from him was a worse sign than anger. He had booked the Aldermore's penthouse under a shell company name, as he always did. The meeting on the 14th was supposed to be routine, a conversation with 2 men who handled his shipping accounts, a matter of renegotiated terms, the kind of thing that required privacy and no paper trail. Teodora didn't know any of this when she knocked on the penthouse door at 11:47 with a fresh set of towels that had been requested through the room service line. She knocked twice. Standard protocol. Announced herself. Housekeeping. The door opened, and a man she had never seen before. Not Bastian, one of his associates, a wiry man with a nervous mouth, grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her inside before she could process what was happening. The suite was large and dim, lit by the lamps near the seating area. 3 men. The wiry one who had grabbed her, a heavier man with a bruised eye standing near the window, and Bastian Voss sitting in the leather chair near the fireplace, one leg crossed over the other, a glass of bourbon on the side table, watching her with an expression of complete neutrality. "I ordered towels," Teodora said. Her voice came out flat. She was surprised by that. Her heartbeat was doing something erratic behind her ribs, but her voice had apparently decided to operate independently. "Close the door, Reyes," Bastian said without looking at the wiry man. Reyes closed it. Bastian looked at her then, not the way men sometimes looked at her in hotel hallways, the dismissive flick of the eyes that took in her uniform, her size, her cart, and found nothing of interest. He looked at her the way he looked at everything. "Inventory. You picked a bad time to knock," he said. "The room requested towels at 11:30, Teodora replied. "I'm 17 minutes late because the service elevator on this floor runs slow. I can leave the towels in the hallway." Something shifted in his face. "Not much. A fraction." "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." The heavier man by the window made a move toward her. Bastian raised one finger, and the man stopped. "Sit down," Bastian said again. Same volume, same tone. "You're not leaving until I decide what to do about the fact that you just walked into a private conversation." Teodora looked at the chair he indicated. She sat. Not because she was afraid, but that wasn't the reason. She sat because she was doing a very rapid calculation about the geometry of the room, the location of the door, the size of the men between her and it, and the specific weight of the lamp on the table beside her, which was cast iron, and which she could reach in approximately 1 second if she needed to. She was buying time. Bastian studied her. "You're not crying, Bea. Most people would be. I haven't decided yet if this is the kind of situation that calls for it." The wiry man, Reyes, let out a short, ugly laugh. "Boss, she's a maid. She's nobody. Just let me walk her out and I'll make sure she has a name," Teodora said. Reyes blinked at her. "What?" "I said I have a name. You called me a maid. I have a name." She kept her eyes on Bastian when she said it. She didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. He was the one who mattered in this room. The other two were furniture. Bastian's expression didn't change, but something happened behind his eyes. He picked up his bourbon, set it back down without drinking. "What's your name?" he asked. "Teodora Vance." "Teodora." He said it once, like he was filing it somewhere. "How long have you worked at this hotel?" 11 months. "You work this floor regularly?" "Rotating schedule. I've had this floor 3 times in the last month. You've seen people come and go from this suite." It wasn't a question. Teodora understood what he was actually asking. She had been a witness, potentially, to things she wasn't supposed to witness. This was the real problem. The towels were irrelevant. She had bad timing, and now she was a loose thread in someone else's carefully maintained fabric. "I do my job," Teodora said. "I change the sheets. I restock the minibar. I don't know who any of you are, and I have no interest in finding out. And if I told you that your continued employment here depended on keeping it that way, then I'd tell you that my continued employment here already depends on minding my own business, and I'm very good at it." Bastian looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Reyes. "Get out, both of you. Wait in the hall." "Boss," the heavier man started. "Out." They left. The door clicked. Teodora and Bastian were alone in the large, dim suite, and she became acutely aware of the fact that she was a 26-year-old hotel maid, alone in a room with a man who had just demonstrated that 2 other men would walk out of that room on his say-so without another word. She recalculated the lamp situation. Bastian stood up. He was taller than she'd registered, well over 6 feet, and he moved the way the suite itself was laid out, with a kind of deliberate spaciousness. Nothing wasted, nothing accidental. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. "Reyes was going to suggest I have you followed," he said. "He thinks anyone who sees something they shouldn't is a liability by definition." "And what do you think?" "I think Reyes is a blunt instrument." He turned from the window. "I think you walked in here with towels. You assessed the room in about 3 seconds, and you've been calculating your exit since you sat down." Teodora said nothing. He was right, and confirming it seemed unwise. "You're not afraid enough," Bastian said. He didn't say it with satisfaction. He said it the way you'd note an interesting weather pattern. "I'm plenty afraid," she said. "I'm just not going to perform it for you." He was quiet for a moment. "Perform it, men like you. And I'm making a broad assumption, but I think it's an accurate one. Men like you expect a certain reaction when they make it clear they're dangerous. Trembling, tears, begging. It establishes the hierarchy. It confirms that you have the power and the other person doesn't." She kept her voice level. "I won't do that. Not because I'm brave. Because I don't think it would help me." Bastian Voss looked at her for so long that the room got very quiet. "What would help you?" he asked. "Letting me leave with the understanding that I have never seen you before in my life, and I would like to continue having never seen you. And I'm supposed to take your word for that." "You're supposed to use your judgment," Teodora said. "If your judgment has gotten you to wherever you are in your life, it should be good enough to tell you whether I'm the kind of person who talks." He studied her. She met it. She didn't look away. She had spent 26 years being looked at like she was the most inconsequential thing in a room, and she had developed an absolute refusal to flinch from being seen. "Vance," he said finally. "Yes, you can go." She stood. She picked up the towels she had set on the edge of the side table when Reyes grabbed her. She walked to the door. "Leave the towels," Bastian said. She set them on the table by the door. She walked out. She did not run. She took the service elevator, which ran slow as always, and she stood in it alone and let her hands shake for exactly the 43 seconds it took to reach the basement floor. Then she went back to work. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. 3 weeks later, Teodora arrived for her shift to find a hotel manager she had never spoken to personally waiting at the employee entrance with an expression that meant bad news. "Mrs. Vance." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "There's been a decision from ownership to restructure the housekeeping department. I'm afraid your position has been eliminated. You'll receive 2 weeks' severance." "Whose instruction?" Teodora asked. "I beg your pardon. This decision, whose instruction was it?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The timing was answer enough. Teodora took her severance paperwork, went home to her apartment. 1 bedroom, 3rd floor of a building whose elevator had been broken since August, which she had stopped counting as an inconvenience because she needed the stairs anyway. And she sat at her kitchen table for a long time. She thought about the 11 months of paychecks. She thought about her mother in Baton Rouge, who she sent money to every other week for the electric bill, and the medication she didn't like to talk about needing. She thought about her own rent, her own bills, the very specific arithmetic of a life that didn't have a margin for error, and she thought about the lamp in the penthouse suite. The cast-iron one within arm's reach, which she had decided not to use. She should have used the lamp. She pulled out her phone. She called the front desk of the Aldermore Grand. She asked to be connected to the penthouse. It rang 3 times. "Vance," said Bastian Voss, like he'd been expecting her. "You had me fired," she said. "I tied up a loose end. I told you I wasn't a threat to you." "And I believed you," he said. "I also couldn't have you in that building with access to that floor. You understand the difference. I understand that I'm now unemployed because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, which is something that generally happens to people who have less power than the person who decides to inconvenience them." A pause. "What do you want, Teodora?" The way he said her name was the same as before. "Like filing something in a precise location." "I want my job back," she said. "Or an equivalent one, or enough money to cover what I would have earned over the next 6 months while I find something else. Those are the options. You can pick the one that's most convenient for you. You're negotiating with me. I'm presenting a reasonable set of outcomes. You can call it whatever you want." There was a silence that stretched long enough to make her wonder if she'd miscalculated badly. Then, "Come to the hotel tonight. 8 o'clock. Not the employee entrance, the front." He hung up. Teodora looked at her phone for a moment. Then she went to her closet and found the one dress that made her feel like she was taking up exactly the right amount of space. Black, well cut, fitted across her wide shoulders and generous hips. And she wore it. She arrived at 8. She was directed to a private dining room off the hotel's main restaurant, a room she had cleaned dozens of times and never eaten in. Bastian was already there, alone this time. He looked at her when she came in. That inventory look. Slower this time. "Sit," he said. "Thank you," she said, and sat. He said, "You called me from your personal phone." "I did. That means I have your number." "I know. And you did it anyway. You already knew my name and where I worked," Teodora said. The phone number seemed like a small additional piece of information compared to what you already had. Something that wasn't quite a smile crossed his face. Not the kind that meant warmth. The kind that meant he'd found something unexpectedly interesting. They ate. He had ordered for the table already. She noticed he had ordered things that would be good rather than things that were complicated to eat. No shells, no precarious sauces. She didn't know what to make of that. She ate, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. Because she was hungry, and the food was very good, and she had learned years ago that refusing to eat at a table to seem smaller or more delicate was the kind of performance she didn't have time for. He watched her without the pity or the subtle disgust she had gotten used to reading in people's faces. He watched her the way he watched everything. "Your father," he said at some point. "Bernard Vance." Her fork stopped. "I know the name," Bastian said. She set the fork down carefully. "My father has been dead for 4 years. I know. Cardiac arrest. He was 53. He looked at her steadily. He worked for Alderton Freight for 22 years, running the books on the South Docks. Teodora was very still. "My father ran legitimate books for a legitimate freight company." "Your father ran the books that were meant to be seen," Bastian said, "and he maintained a separate and considerably more intricate set of records that were not meant to be seen by anyone except the men who needed them. He was exceptional at it. The Alderton operation ran cleaner than anything moving through this port for 15 years because of the way Bernard Vance managed the paper trail. The room was very quiet. He never told me," Teodora said. "I know. He was careful with you." A pause. "I respected him. He was a man of discipline and intelligence, and he kept his family entirely separate from his professional life. I always considered that the mark of someone who understood what he was involved in." Teodora looked at the man across the table. She thought about her father, the way he came home every night, the way he helped her with her homework, the way he drove her to school in a car that was 15 years old and heated on only one side. The way he had looked at her, not like inventory. Like she was the whole point of everything. "What do you want?" she said. "The same thing you do," Bastian said. "A reasonable outcome. I'm a hotel maid, Mr. Voss. You're Bernard Vance's daughter," he said. "You're also, I've been told by the housekeeping supervisor, who has absolutely no reason to say this diplomatically, the best employee that Floor has had in a decade. You notice things. You're methodical. You're discreet." His pale eyes were steady. "Reyes is leaving my organization. I need someone who can manage the administrative operations of several of my legitimate holdings. The shipping accounts, the dockside logistics, the paper that needs to stay clean." Teodora stared at him. "You want to hire me? I'm offering you a position that would pay 4 times what the hotel was paying you. Require a security clearance of a kind that doesn't officially exist, and demand the kind of discretion that your father had and apparently passed on to you. And if I say no, then I give you the 6 months' salary you asked for on the phone, you find another job, and we never see each other again." He said it plainly. No threat in it. Just the arithmetic. She looked at the space between them across the white tablecloth. The good silver, the food she'd actually eaten, because she was done performing smallness. She thought about her mother's electric bill. She thought about the service elevator that ran slow. She thought about her father sitting in an office doing the books that were meant to be seen. She thought about the lamp. "I have conditions," she said. His expression shifted. "Tell me. Full salary from the day you had me dismissed, including the 3 weeks since. Not a bonus, back pay." She watched him. "The building where I live, my floor has a broken elevator. I know you can have that fixed in 48 hours if you want to. I want it fixed. She held his gaze. "And if I ever, at any point, find that what I'm being asked to manage crosses into something that would embarrass my father's memory, I walk out. No consequences, no raise." Bastian said nothing for a long moment. The room was very quiet. "Raise is gone," he said finally. "I told you that. I want it said plainly." "No consequences," he agreed. "If you choose to leave, you leave." He was quiet. "The elevator will be fixed by Friday." Teodora nodded once. "The back pay will be in your account tomorrow morning." She nodded again. "And Teodora," he said. She looked at him. "Your father was a man I trusted. That's not a small thing." Something crossed his face, not the inventory look, something older and more complicated. "I don't extend it easily." She understood what he wasn't saying. She understood it the way she'd understood the geometry of the lamp, the weight of it, the distance to reach it, the decision not to. "Neither do I," she said. She started the following Monday. She learned quickly, she always had, and she discovered that her father had apparently not built her from scratch, so much as carved her from the same material as himself. The patterns of the accounts, the logic of the paper trails, the way legitimate documentation interlocked with the infrastructure underneath it. It was comprehensible to her in a way that she didn't fully examine too closely, because examining it too closely would have required her to feel things about her father she hadn't finished sorting through. She was 2 months in when she understood something was wrong. It was a number, a small discrepancy in one of the freight invoices, the kind of thing most people would have attributed to rounding. Teodora did not attribute things to rounding. She flagged it. She tracked it backward through 3 months of records. She tracked it forward into projected accounts. Someone was skimming. Not much, precisely little enough to be invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. But consistently, over time, the amounts added up to a figure large enough to matter. And the pattern pointed to someone inside the organization's inner circle. Someone with access to the accounts Teodora now managed. She stayed late one Thursday, alone in the office Bastian had arranged for her. Not the hotel, a separate building, a suite of rooms that looked like the offices of a quiet import company, and largely were, just not exclusively. She was cross-referencing a third set of invoices when she heard a door open behind her that she hadn't expected to hear open. She turned. It was a man she knew only as Strelkov, one of Bastian's senior logistics managers, the one who had been most visibly unhappy about her presence in the organization since her first week. He was in his late 40s, gray-haired, with the specific resentment of a man who had expected to eventually inherit a thing and had instead watched a stranger walk in and sit at what he'd considered his table. He had a key to this office. She had not known that until now. He also had something else in his hand. He raised it. Teodora recognized the shape. "You've been digging in the wrong files," Strelkov said. His accent was heavier when he was unhappy. She had noticed that before. "You are very good at your job, Miss Vance. Too good." Teodora's mind moved fast and cold. She was at the desk. He was between her and the door. The second exit, the interior hallway door to the back office, was to her left, but she would have to get past the desk first, and she had maybe 2 seconds before he either moved toward her or lost his nerve one way or the other. She did not lose her nerve. She stood up and threw the lamp. There was always a lamp. She had started to understand this about her life. There was always a lamp, and she had stopped not using them. Directly at his head. Not to hit him, to move him. He flinched sideways, instinct, and that flinch gave her the half-second she needed to grab the heavy ceramic coffee mug from the desk and close the distance between them before he recovered. She hit his wrist, hard, the precise point where the radius bone runs close to the surface. She had learned that from a self-defense class she'd taken years ago in a church basement on a Tuesday night, a class with mostly older women who had all arrived with the same careful expression of not wanting to admit why they were there. He dropped the gun. It clattered to the floor, and Teodora kicked it under the desk with her foot in one smooth motion, and then she had her arm across his chest and her considerable weight behind it, and she drove him back against the wall with a force that knocked the breath out of him and shook the framed logistics certificates rattling on the drywall. She pressed her forearm against his sternum and leaned in. She was breathing hard, but she was breathing. "The files I've been looking at," she said, "are the ones you've been stealing from, and I want you to understand something." She pressed harder, just a fraction. "I have not yet told Bastian Voss what I found. That's a decision I was still making when you walked in here and turned it into a completely different kind of decision." Strelkov's face had gone a bad color. "If you move before I tell you to move," Teodora said, "I'm going to find out how loud this building is, and you're going to find out what happens when I'm not the only one who knows you've been robbing the man whose trust you've apparently been borrowing for years." She held him there for exactly long enough. Then she stepped back. She kept herself between him and the gun under the desk. "Sit in that chair," she said, "and don't move." He sat. She called Bastian from her cell phone. He answered on the second ring. "I need you at the office," she said. "What happened?" Not a question. The way he said it told her he'd already begun to move. "Strelkov has been skimming the freight accounts for approximately 8 months. He also just came into the office after hours with a weapon, which I have secured." She paused. "He's sitting in the chair in the corner. He'll stay there." A silence. Then, "I'm 7 minutes away. I'll be here." He arrived in 6. He came through the main door without knocking, which was reasonable because it was his building, and he stopped inside the doorway and took in the room. Strelkov in the chair, the gun lying under the desk where she had kicked it, Teodora standing between them with her arms at her sides, and her hair knocked out of its pin from the struggle. He looked at Strelkov for a long time. Something happened in Bastian's face that was very cold and very controlled, and Strelkov seemed to understand what it meant in a way Teodora didn't have full context for yet, because Strelkov's color went from bad to worse. Then Bastian looked at Teodora. He crossed the room in a few strides, and she expected him to check the gun, or to check Strelkov, or to get on his phone. Instead, he stopped in front of her, close, and he looked at her the way he had at dinner, not the inventory look. The other one, the one she hadn't fully named yet. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Quietly, no. His eyes moved to her arms, checking anyway. She let him. Her hands were shaking slightly, which she noticed with the same detached clarity she'd noticed everything else tonight. The shaking had started in the elevator, on the night she first met him. And she'd decided then that shaking was acceptable provided it happened after the thing that needed doing was done. "You called me before you ran," he said. "It's your organization. It's your problem to resolve. I just needed to not get shot before you could resolve it. You could have run. I told you, I don't run." She met his eyes. "I solve the problem I'm in." Bastian was very close. Close enough that she could see the gray in his hair clearly. Close enough to see the small controlled breath he let out before he spoke. "I need to deal with this," he said. "With him." A gesture toward Strelkov. "And then I'm coming to find you. I'll be home," she said. "Teodora." She looked at him. "I owe you something," he said, "the kind of debt that doesn't go on a ledger." She understood what he meant. She thought she did. She was not entirely certain, and she had learned to be careful with things she was not entirely certain about. "We'll discuss it," she said. Later. She took her coat from the hook by the door, and she walked out. She did not run. The elevator in this building worked correctly, because Bastian Voss ran things that worked, and she took it down to the street in the time it was supposed to take. He came to find her at 10:30 that same night. She had been home for 2 hours. She had made tea and taken a shower, and sat on her couch in the dark for a while, thinking about her father, who had kept 2 sets of books and brought her to school in a car that heated on only one side, who had taught her to be precise and quiet and thorough, and to notice the things other people overlooked. She thought he would have had something useful to say about all of this. She wasn't sure what. The knock was 3 times. Measured. She answered the door. Bastian was there. He looked for the first time, slightly undone. The jacket was gone, the collar was open, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen in any of their previous exchanges. A kind of exhaustion that was less about sleep and more about the sustained effort of maintaining the particular kind of control he maintained all day, every day. "Come in," she said. He came in. He looked at her apartment, small, clean books on the shelves, and mismatched furniture and plants in the window that all appeared to be actually alive, which meant she had figured out the specific calculus of the light in each location, because she was the kind of person who figured out specific calculi. And he looked at it the way he looked at everything, but without the professional neutrality. Just a man looking at where another person actually lived. She made him sit on her couch, which had seen better days, but was structurally sound. She gave him a glass of water because it seemed right. He took it. Then he looked at her hand. There was a cut on her palm from where the ceramic mug had chipped when she'd grabbed it in the struggle. She hadn't noticed it until now. A thin line of dried blood across the base of her thumb. Without asking, Bastian reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded handkerchief, and he took her hand in both of his and he pressed it against the cut. His hands were large and his grip was careful. Teodora looked at the top of his bowed head. She thought about everything she knew about him, which was enough to understand what kind of man he was, and not enough to predict what kind of man he was specifically to her. She thought about her father. She thought about the lamp she'd finally thrown. "You knew about me before that night," she said. "When you saw my name tag, you knew who my father was." He didn't look up immediately. "Yes, and you let Reyes fire me anyway. It was the safer choice. But then you asked me to come to dinner." "Yes. Why?" He looked up then, the pale green eyes, very close. "Because you sat in a chair in a room with 2 armed men, and you were calculating how to get out," he said. "Not out of the room, out of the situation. You were 3 steps ahead of everything happening around you. And you looked at me like I was a problem you were going to solve, not a man you needed to be afraid of." His voice was quiet. "I have spent a very long time in rooms where everyone was afraid of me. I didn't know that was starting to feel like a cage until I met someone who wasn't." Teodora was quiet for a moment. His hands were still holding hers, the handkerchief pressed against her palm. "I was afraid of you," she said honestly. "I just didn't think it would help either of us if I showed it." The corner of his mouth moved, something that was closer to a real smile than anything she'd seen from him. "I know, you're going to make this complicated," she said. "Not an accusation. Just noting the probability." "Almost certainly," he agreed. She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had cost her a job and given her a better one, who had known her father's name and let her sit at a table and eat without performing any smallness, who had come to her apartment after a difficult night and sat on her imperfect couch and pressed a monogrammed handkerchief to a cut on her hand with the same focused precision he applied to everything else in his life. She thought about ledgers. The ones meant to be seen and the ones that weren't. "My father always said," Teodora said quietly, "that the most important books are the ones nobody else gets to look at." Bastian was very still. "He meant the accounting," she added, "but I think he might have meant other things too." The city outside her window was doing what it always did. The sounds of New Orleans at night. Distant music, a car, the particular warm hum of a city built at the bottom of a bowl that collected everything that passed through it and held it. The lamp on her side table cast a small circle of warm light. The right kind this time. Bastian Voss, who ran the port and the paper, and the invisible machinery of half the commerce moving through this city, sat on her second-hand couch and didn't move. Like a man who had nowhere else he wanted to be. Teodora Vance, who had spent 11 months changing sheets in a 5-star hotel and making herself invisible and sending money home for electric bills, looked at him and made a choice. She left her hand in his.